What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. This time we're going to be going over the Stamina Warden DPS. This build is for Clockwork City. It does involve using the bear, so this is considered a pet build for all intents and purposes. So do keep in mind that you won't be able to use a pet build for all fights, particularly the last fights of most trials are kind of pet unfriendly, so it's something to be aware of, so it's a good idea to have a backup build that doesn't use the bear if you do intend on using this build in the future, especially in endgame content. Like our other build videos, we'll be going over our gear, our skills, our CP point distributions, and to finish things off with a 3 million dummy Parse, and we're going to do a quick discussion about where Stamina Wardens kind of fall in line with other Stamina DPS in the endgame content realm. So starting off things with our gear. Our monster set is going to be Velodrets. You can go with Selene. Selene's is easier to get since you get that from Selene's Web versus Cradle of Shadows. So you can replace Velodrets with Selene's. You do a little bit less DPS, but it's easier to get. For our second piece, we're going to be using Twice Fanged Serpent. This particular build assumes you are the only Stamina DPS in the group, or are one of two Stamina DPS in the group, so you can be a little bit selfish here. However, if you are in a fully optimized raid group with 4 Stamina DPS or 3 Stamina DPS, you might be asked to use a different set here, such as Night Mother's Gaze or Thunder Flame or Morag Tom, that helps debuffs the enemy. Two-Fanged Snake only improves your DPS, doesn't improve the group DPS, versus the other 3 sets. Those will help your other Stamina DPS friends get higher numbers. So again, you can replace Two-Fanged Snake with any of those 3 sets depending on your group composition. For our second set, we'll be using Vicious Ophidian. All 3 jewelry pieces here have weapon damage enchants on them. Because basically all Stamina DPS classes are going with heavy attack builds. Basically they're weaving in heavy attacks on their front bar. There's really no need to have a regen glyph on your jewelry, unlike with Magicka DPS where you kind of have the option to run a regen glyph instead of a spell damage glyph. So for stamina, you want to stick with 3 weapon damage enchants. For our front bar here, we have 2 daggers with Vicious Ophidian. Our main hand is going to be infused with poison damage enchant. You can go with Nirnhoned, but in my testing, infused does pull out ahead on Nirnhoned, at least more consistently. Our offhand is going to be your second dagger. You can do Sharpened, Precise, or Nirnhoned. Sharpened lets you shift points out of piercing into other nodes. However, Precise and Nirnhoned are still very good options as well. Weapon damage enchant on your offhand dagger. We're going to be using the Maelstrom Bow, either Nirnhoned or Sharpened. You'll see here that we aren't going to be using any enchant. They changed the way Maelstrom weapons work in Clockwork City. It's no longer an enchant. The effect is now a set effect, so Infused no longer buffs that unique effect for Maelstrom weapons. So instead of using the standard enchant Absorb Stamina, we're going to be using double Ravage Health Poisons. Right over here. These can be made using Alkahest, and then you used Blessed Thistle, Nightshade, and Fleshfly Larva. It's a fairly cheap poison to make. Nightshade prices have gone up since the introduction of this patch due to this change in the meta, but it is still fairly inexpensive to make compared to things like Essence of Spell Power, for example. Going over our attribute points, we have all of our points into stamina, which leaves us with 16.2k health. This is on the lower end of things, depending on how comfortable you are with your class, as well as the dungeon or trial mechanics. You might want to shift some points from stamina into health, or add in a health glyph on one of your big armor pieces, so you can hit 17k health. And remember that a dead DPS is 0 DPS, so you want to keep yourself alive as long as possible, so it's worth taking the hit in the maximum stamina pools to increase your chances of surviving. For our Mundus Stone, we're going to be going with the Warrior. If you're the only stamina DPS in your group, you can go with the Lovers to get that extra penetration. However, in my opinion, it's better to go with the Warrior and then use CP points to get to that penetration cap of 18,000. You just have much finer control using CP compared to using the Lover. These are our skill bars here. Our front bar is going to be Bird of Prey, Subterranean Assault, Blood Craze, Deadly Cloak, Rearming Trap, and we have Guardian's Savagery or Wild Guardian. For our back bar, we have Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Bull Netch, Green Lotus, and you have to double slot your Guardian. Green Lotus can be replaced with other skills if you want. I have this in here for the added healing, but you can also use Ice Fortress or Expansive Frost Cloak to give yourself that major resistance buff. If you use Ice Fortress, you also gain minor protection, which helps out your survivability a little bit more because it reduces your damage incoming damage by 8%. Looking over our champion points now, as of Clockwork City, you have 230 points to put into each of the 3 different branches. So going over our green branch first, 75 into Tenacity and 75 into Mooncalf. That leaves us 80 points, which can be divided into these next 3 nodes, and however you'd like, however you see fit. I personally have 28 into Shadow Ward, 26 into Tumbling, and 26 into Warlord. For our blue CPs, I have 44 into Master at Arms, 61 in Thaumaturge, 56 in Precise Strikes, 20 in Piercing, and 49 in Mighty. Now, depending on your group optimization, whether you have Night Mother's Gaze, Sunder Flame, Alkosh, all those debuff sets active, you might need to put more points into Piercing, or you might need to put less points into Piercing. It all depends on how optimized your group is. This particular CP setup is optimized for the Trials group that I run with. We get Infused Thorax Crusher, we have an additional Stamina DPS running Night Mother's Gaze, which allows us to use either Sunder Flame or Twice Fang Snake. The difference between Twice Fang Snake and Sunder Flame is only 1000 penetration, so this is kind of the nice middle ground there, if I have to use Sunder Flame versus Twice Fanged. And we also have a Stamplar in the group that's running Power Up to Light. So that's kind of where these numbers come from. If you need to put points into Piercing because you're like the only Stamina DPS or your other Stamina DPS don't have debuff sets, take points out of Precise Strikes first, and then Thaumaturge, and then Master at Arms. That'll give you the most bang for your buck and have the lowest impact on your overall DPS. For our red CPs, you can redistribute these as you see fit. This is kind of a one-size-fits-most configuration, but depending on the content you're running, you can put more points into other nodes. For example, in Hell Raw, since you're taking more physical damage, you can take points out of Elemental Defender and put them into Hardy. 61 into Ironclad, 1 into Medium Armor Focus, 56 into Thick-Skinned, Hardy, and Elemental Defender. Some other information to go over real quick. For our food buff, we're going to be going with blue, max health, max magicka food. And we're going to be using Essence of Weapon Power, which gives us Major Brutality, Major Savagery, and Major Endurance. If you have Alchemy leveled all the way up to 50 and have Medicinal Use completely maxed out, then you will be able to maintain these buffs as long as you keep using your potions as soon as they're available to you. So that's it for kind of the gear and skills in the CP. Now we're going to go ahead and start our parse. Now one thing to keep in mind while we're doing our parse, and we see our final numbers, Wardens do have an innate source of Major Fracture through Subterranean Assault, as well as Minor Berserk in Bird of Prey. Normally you get these buffs. We get Minor Berserk from Combat Prayer, and you get Major Fracture from Pierce Armor from your tank. Not all stamina classes have innate sources of this. The only other class that have sources of both Major Fracture and Minor Berserk is Stamina Nightblades. Stamina DKs are the other class that have access to Major Fracture, but they don't have access to Minor Berserk. So do keep that in mind. Dummy parses on Stamina Nightblades, Stamina DKs, and Stamina Wardens tend to be slightly inflated compared to Stamina Sorcerers and Stamina Templars because of their innate sources of Major Fracture, which boosts their DPS by a considerable margin. So do keep that in mind when you're trying to compare Stamina DPS parses on 3 million dummies. Alright, with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and start our parse in 3, 2, and 1. So there we go. A 39.8k parse using the bear on a stamina Warden DPS. The bear does a very sizable proportion of our DPS, so this is why our parse here is so high. The only parse that solo self-buff parse that I've seen go higher is probably Stam DKs and Stam Nightblades. In fact, Stam DKs probably pull slightly lower on self-buff 3 mil DPS tests. So do keep in mind, again, Wardens do have your source, a innate source of Major Fracture as well as Minor Berserk. So our parse is going to be slightly inflated compared to other stamina DPS that don't really have access to these sort of buffs on their own. And also keep in mind this is a 3 million dummy parse. So in an actual trial scenario where the fight goes on longer, any sustained problems that you might have are going to become a lot more apparent just because the fights are going to take longer. You're going to be playing with more mechanics, especially if you're on a progression guild. So do keep that in mind. But Stamina Wardens are in a very good place right now. There's only really 2 Stamina classes that can pull higher DPS, single target DPS, and that's Stamina DKs and Stamina Nightblades. However, Stamina Wardens have great multi-target DPS through Subterranean Assault. If you can see how hard it hits here, it hits pretty damn hard. And Subterranean Assault can hit multiple targets and apply Major Fracture and Major Reach to all of them. So Stamina Wardens are very powerful in trash fights. So they fall a little bit short of Stamina DKs when it comes to single target DPS, but they more than make up for that in multi-target DPS. So Stamina Wardens do have a place in the endgame meta. However, Stamina DKs and Stamina Nightblades are going to be preferred over Stamina Wardens in those top like 0.1% of guilds, who are shooting for the #1 spot on the leaderboards. So Stamina Wardens, definitely a very powerful stamina class to pick up. It's a little bit difficult to get that rotation down because you do want to maintain Subterranean Assault going at all times, and that has a 3-second cooldown, so it doesn't really line up all that great with your other skills, but as we can see here, in the right hands, a Stamina Warden can pull amazing DPS. So that's it for this video. Hope this guide helps, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.